Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our continuing series on the big man himself, Dracula. Today we're taking a look at Nosferatu, released in 1994 by Sega on the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom. Interestingly, this game was apparently in development during the same time that the Super Nintendo was in development. It was a highly hyped game, but when it came to the console itself, the reviews were good but not great. Apparently it was quite a letdown. As far as genre is concerned, they call this a cinematic action platformer, but really what it is Prince of Persia with a Dracula theme on top of it. But I don't say that to kind of negate the game. It's actually quite enjoyable. There's a lot of good puzzle elements to it, and a lot of the tutorials, like you see right there, being trapped in that beginning area, you need to learn as you go along. The game doesn't hold your hand, but it does give you enough information to kind of understand what may need to be done. So in that respect, it's a really interesting game for sure. Graphically, it looks awesome. I love all the different animations in the background. You have that prisoner there with his hands reaching out. I wasn't sure on my first playthrough if he would grab me or not, but he was just a background element. But you will see, animation-wise, this game borrows a lot of inspiration from Prince of Persia, even down to kind of the setting. I know it's not Arabian, it's, Dracula's castle, but those archways and the pits feel very heavily inspired by Prince of Persia, which is not a bad thing because that game was obviously loved. But right here, this centipede, I can't figure out how to kick down. I never was able to figure it out. You can do a running slide attack, but in the amount of space they give you down there, it really wasn't possible, so I guess he just gets to keep his chest. Combat-wise, the controls are sluggish down to that cinematic nature. Sometimes you feel like every button you push is input and you're playing the game. Other times you feel like you hit the button and nothing happens. But there is kind of this multifaceted layer to it. You go in that door right there and now you're in this cell and you open up that treasure chest and you get a crystal, which is a life up. So there are, it is still a 2D game, but it has some sense of 3D in its environment, which is really interesting, something you don't see as much. But I will say, I didn't really know much about this game. I knew it existed, and when I was, kind of previewing games to talk about Dracula, I thought, well, let me give this a play, see what it's like. And I actually found that I really did enjoy it, although I will say that it definitely has its shortcomings, things like there is no save or password system. You have to beat this game in one sitting. Now, if you know what you're doing, I played this a few different times. What sometimes takes 30 minutes can then take 5 once you know exactly where you're going, because there are some routes, and you will see there we had to use that running slide to get underneath that little wall. And once you get used to the controls, it does open up a lot more, and it becomes a lot more playable than it did at the start. Kind of the same thing with Prince of Persia. Your first playthrough is going to be quite difficult, but on continuing playthroughs, when you get a hang of the overall system, it does become a lot easier. So I do appreciate that about Nosferatu, that even though there isn't a continue, as you learn the game, it becomes a lot quicker just to run through the whole thing. Then you just have some pressure plates, you walk on them, the gate goes up, and that's another continuing theme, is that each individual stage kind of shows you at the beginning what may need to be done, and then as you're playing, you kind of find out what you need to do. Although I will say some of the enemy placement is quite cheap. We have these cackling zombies coming down from the ceiling, and no matter what it is I do, they just seem to hit me. They take damage, you walk forward a little bit, they hit you again. There's really no telegraphing that. So what you kind of find out after, you die and play through the stage again is the lower route is actually the better route to take. And routing in this game is important because you can get to the same place going 2 different ways. You don't want to follow the spikes, honestly, but you can just hit continue. You start right back where you left off. There aren't really any lives, to talk about, so you can just keep playing and kind of learn from your mistakes. But you will see here that old Frankenstein does show up, and I'm going to try to attack him, and some of my attacks feel like they're not landing. I hit the button to attack, but it just didn't work, and you see I advance towards him, hit him, I can kind of jab at him, but as he turns around, he just walks right through me. So there's kind of like a stick and move gameplay style to the combat itself. And you pick up these crystals here, they're just going to give you a little bit of power-ups later on in the game. But right there again, the controls are so touchy in this game that I think that's really what kind of hampered its review scores. You have to hit every button precisely. If you're even a frame off in either direction, you're going to end up in a situation where you run right into a wall versus being able to slide underneath it. And when it comes to combat or platforming, that can be difficult because there's a lot of moments where you fall into a pit and you feel like it's a cheap death. You think you hit that button before you walked off the ledge, but magically your character Kyle just ends up in that pit. So that's kind of what hampers the game, although really, if you play it, I think it's a super enjoyable game, and it is one of the better games that I played for the series that I hadn't played before. Definitely would say that Dracula the Undead on the Lynx was my favorite unknown Dracula game before this, but I would say this comes in as a strong second as something that is definitely worth checking out. Now, I wouldn't buy it though, because this game is quite expensive as a loose copy, and if you want a complete in-box copy, it's going to run you hundreds of dollars. I really wouldn't recommend it at that price whatsoever. I'm playing it on a flash cart on my Super Famicom, so it works perfectly fine for me, but I definitely wouldn't invest in this game unless you're a hardcore collector. Got the first boss fight here. Guy turns into a werewolf, and honestly, I just jab at him over and over again, and I'm easily able to beat the fight. So at least for this boss, you know, they're okay, they're not great. But I do love these in-between level transitions. You get the zombie coming down the hallway, and then you get a map that shows the entire area that you're progressing through and what stage you're going into. That's kind of like a Castlevania or Ghouls and Ghosts vibe to it. You see that we're progressing to stage 2, and then there's 3 more stages until you get to Dracula's castle himself, or I guess in this instance Nosferatu, although really they're kind of thematically interchangeable. And then you have this eye here. I love that it's just floating around. Definitely another Castlevania vibe going on here. They kind of borrow between Castlevania and Prince of Persia so much that you kind of get that, like, if Prince of Persia was a Castlevania game. And you can take things like Another World or Flashback, and those are also going to be really similar gameplay styles to this, except, you know, you have fist combat versus weapons and something like Another World where you have a gun. But sometimes these enemies jump at you, sometimes they don't. As the stages go on, they seem to have a progressively larger moveset, but I would say that the enemy variety is also a bit limited, although I do like their character design, so it is, you know, definitely something fun to look at. But short of that, we have the little mummy man here, and really what I find out is most of the enemies in this game you can kind of just run by. Sometimes it's really not advisable to fight them. You can take one hit there, and then he just keeps walking right and left, and you can push that pressure plate, open the gate, and go right to the next stage. So it's kind of a cheat, but also kind of like a gameplay style where you sort of just want to avoid combat if you can, because really outside of getting a few crystals here and there isn't a ton of reward to the combat. I do like how that guy melts out there. And then there's weird situations like this where you have this gate going up and down, and all it is blocking your path, but it doesn't hurt you, so all you do is continue to push forward until you get past it. I bonked my head, but no big deal. But things like that, I'm really not sure why they put them in, because it's not an obstacle, you can't be damaged, yet it is kind of impeding your process. And considering the entire game is on a timer, it can sometimes be a little difficult. The timer is generous, but some of the stages are definitely mazes that you need to figure out how to navigate through, so I would say that in that respect it can sometimes feel unfair that they're tricking you into going down dead-end paths, or they're putting obstructions in your way that really don't have any danger except to run that time limit out. Got another crystal there. There's just a few power-ups, and then you have these little areas where you jump on it once, it crumbles, you jump on it a second time, and it's going to totally dissolve, so you kind of have to navigate your way around the level to make sure those don't break, because if they break, you can't get through to this corridor, and you can't progress the level unless you restart it, or you exit the area to the previous area, or you die. And then things like this, you just push, it opens up. But would I recommend this game? Definitely, it's worth checking out. The graphics are great, the audio and soundtrack are awesome, and the gameplay itself is good, if not great. I think if they changed the control style and just made this a little bit more action feeling and a little less cinematic, it would have been a lot better experience. But as far as games on the Super Nintendo, you could do a lot worse than this, like Bram Stoker's Dracula. I tried to play that, I didn't even want to talk about it. Short of that, thanks so much for watching. We'll be back on Friday with an episode in our Technicality series, but we hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.